Of all the subgenres of professional wrestling in the world, there may be none more unique than Lucha Libre. I don't think there is a nation in the world whose wrestling style and identity are as deeply intertwined with its wider culture as Mexico's. The most distinctive feature of Lucha Libre is the mask. It dates back to the early 1930s, and over time, thanks to the popularity of wrestlers such as El Santo, Blue Demon and Mil Mascaras, the mask has become synonymous with Lucha Libre. The mask is a luchador's pride, and to lose your mask is to lose your honour, to lose your identity itself. But for a luchador, the mask of a rival is the greatest prize one can claim, far more prestigious than any championship belt. Titles change hands all the time, but a mask is something that can be claimed only once. The biggest matches in Lucha Libre are Lucha de Apuestas, or wager matches, and there can be no bigger wager than betting your mask against your opponents. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about possibly the most critically acclaimed Lucha de Apuesta of all time, and why I believe it to be the purest form of Lucha Libre the world has ever seen. Atlantis vs Villano III. Mask vs mask. Atlantis made his debut in 1983, having been trained by Diablo Velasco, a legendary trainer in Mexico who also trained Gory Guerrero, El Dandy, Mil Mascaras, Pero Aguayo, and Los Hermanos Dinamitas, to name just a few. Atlantis became one of the perennial stars of EMLL until its rebranding in 1991 to CMLL. Atlantis was loyal to CMLL as his home promotion for his entire career, and save for a short period in the mid-2000s, was a beloved technico for that entire time. His nickname, El Ídolo de los Niños, or Children's Idol, demonstrates the popularity that Atlantis had amongst the younger fans. Atlantis was, and still is today, a classic technico, and by 2000 he was firmly established as one of the top stars in CMLL, having won a multitude of titles and claimed many masks, most notably Kung Fu and Mano Negra, as well as the hairs of El Tejano and Pero Aguayo. Villano III had debuted in 1970, unmasked as Rey Rosas, and was the third son of wrestler Rey Mendoza. Mendoza had 8 children, and his 5 sons would all become luchadors, Los Villanos. After wrestling under various masks and names for the first few years of his career, his father and 2 older brothers would deem him experienced enough to take the name his brothers had adopted a few years earlier, one that would become a dynasty, as his younger brothers, his sons, and his nephews would carry on the name into the future. Villano III held many different championships in his career, including multiple trios championships with his brothers, and several different singles titles, including 7 reigns as WWF Light Heavyweight Champion. Titles have much less significance in Lucha Libre than they do in wrestling anywhere else in the world. It is victories in Lucha de Apuesta matches that are far more valuable. By the year 2000, he was one of the most prolific Lucha de Apuesta competitors of all time, having claimed over 50 masks in his career, including Pegasus Kid Chris Benoit, Super Astro, Los Escorpiones, and the original Mr. Niebla. The rivalry between Atlantis and Villano III began in late 1998, when Villano began competing full-time for CMLL, after spending the majority of his career competing for the UWA and later AAA. The two competed against each other in many heated trios matches, with Atlantis often teaming with names such as El Hijo de Santo, Raul de Jalisco Jr., and Emilio Charles Jr., and Villano III often teamed with Pieroff Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr., and Shocker. After Atlantis defeated Dr. Wagner Jr. in May of 1999 to claim the light heavyweight title for the second time, Villano III set his sights firmly on the championship. In November, in his 4th attempt, Villano defeated Atlantis to win the title. After this title change, the two continued regularly competing against each other in many intense trios main events. The rivalry between Atlantis and Villano was already heated, but the hatred between the two would reach a fever pitch in February of 2000, when Atlantis attempted to regain the light heavyweight title from Villano. After submitting Villano with La Atlantida to claim the second fall in this 2 out of 3 falls bout, Atlantis would celebrate and prepare for the final fall. Villano rolls to the apron, appearing to have suffered a back injury as a result of Atlantis' signature move, After being checked on ringside, one of Villano's brothers would then pick him up and walk him backstage. Atlantis would demand the ref begin to count out Villano and declare Atlantis the winner, with Villano's brother returning to call for a timeout. As the referee begins to count, Villano III, looking slightly smaller and much more energised than he did moments earlier, returns to the ring. He gets caught with a back body drop and tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, but manages to quickly take back control of a snap power slam and senton, before locking in the Cristo Negro once again to get the submission and retain the title. Villano III, quote-unquote, who had clearly been replaced by one of his brothers when he had been taken backstage earlier in the match, rushed to the back immediately after winning the title, covering his head with a towel as fans throw drinks at him and his brother. A furious Atlantis, knowing he's been screwed out of the title, cuts an impassioned promo, throwing out the challenge to Villano for a mask vs mask match in Arena Mexico, a challenge that Villano would accept. With that, the main event for CMLL's Final Judgment event is set: Atlantis vs Villano III, mask vs mask. Generally, in Lucha de Apuesta matches, there is a disparity between the two luchadors in terms of popularity or age, with the loss of one's mask often being one of the final matches of a veteran's career. What is exceedingly rare though, is to see two main event caliber luchadors, both in their prime, compete in a mask vs mask match. Villano III is the first to make his way to the ring, accompanied by his younger brothers and by Scorpio Jr., his cornerman for this match. It cannot be overstated just how loud the crowd is here. The reaction that Villano gets, especially while he's playing off the crowd on the entrance ramp, is insane. It's neither a boo nor a cheer, it's a roar. When Atlantis is making his entrance, his reaction is much closer to boos than Villano's was. When he enters the ring, these boos get even louder, and there is an unmistakable chant for Villano as he is joined by his cornerman, Rudo Jr. When they are re-announced inside the ring, both Atlantis and Villano get very loud but mixed reactions from the crowd. The pair are announced as the Technico and the Rudo respectively. Promotions explicitly acknowledging the face-heel leanings of wrestlers is something that really sets Lucha Libre apart from other wrestling subcultures. In American wrestling, for example, commentators rarely state a wrestler's alignment outright. Instead, they frame it through crowd reactions, calling a babyface a fan favourite, or a heel unpopular, or by emphasising their honourable or underhanded tactics as the case may be. Promotions let the audiences infer who the good and bad guys are, rather than declaring it outright. In Lucha Libre though, being a face or heel is not an opinion or a perception, but a fact. The states of Rudo and Technico aren't as much personal outlooks, but more distinct, chosen positions. Baby Richard is announced as the referee, and both Atlantis and Rudo Jr. protest his appointment to officiate a match of such high stakes. This is something else that really sets Lucha Libre apart from other wrestling cultures, the presence of clearly defined Technico and Rudo leaning referees. The crooked or biased referee itself is not a trope unique to Lucha Libre, but its acknowledgement as fact, rather than conjecture or opinion is. Much like with wrestlers themselves, a referee in American wrestling may be talked about or presented as crooked or biased, with names like Danny Davis and Charles Robinson coming to mind, but the promotion they worked for would never introduce them as crooked. Here though, Baby Richard is literally announced as Arbitro Rudo, or Rudo referee, his biased nature acknowledged by CMLL itself. The presentation of Rudos and Technicos in Lucha Libre is very different to the way heels and babyfaces are presented in other styles of wrestling, and is something that has been tough for me to wrap my head around as I've been trying to better understand Lucha Libre. Atlantis and Rudo ask an official to switch the referee, which Richard protests, until Villano agrees. The Rudo agreeing with the Technico to have an impartial official for the match shows just what's at stake here. It's not simply about getting a win or a loss, and it's not even just about claiming the mask of a rival. It's about Atlantis and Villano III trying to prove to themselves, their opponent, and the world that they are the better man. Rafael Maya makes his way to the ring to referee the contest, and the match can finally begin. As the match gets underway, the crowd is still incredibly hot, and there is a lot of support for Villano. It begs the question, what makes a heel a heel? Rudo and heel are often used interchangeably, but in my mind, they're not quite the same thing. My understanding of Lucha Libre is that Rudo and Technico tend to refer to style and sportsmanship, whereas heel and babyface in my mind at least, are more closely correlated with crowd reaction. If a rudo wrestler is cheered over a technico, is the rudo a heel or a babyface? Is the technico a heel as a result? Can a rudo be a babyface? If they can, then Villano in this match is a perfect example of it, since the crowd, at least during the entrances and early stages of the match, appears to be much louder in their support for Villano. These will be questions for someone with a greater understanding of Lucha Libre than I, but I will come back to the ideas of technico and rudo a bit later on. Atlantis and Villano begin by exchanging waist locks, before taking their grappling exchanges to the mat. Atlantis catches Villano with a huge arm drag and begins to work over Villano's left arm. We cut to an awesome shot as the cameraman makes his way down the entrance ramp, and we see Villano execute a head scissor takedown to ground and restrain Atlantis for the first time in the match. Atlantis is able to escape with a handspring, and despite that impressive display of athleticism and technical ability, the reaction from the crowd seems to be somewhat negative, much closer to jeers than cheers. Villano manages to take down Atlantis and begins working over the arm, though Atlantis is beneath the bottom rope. This is the first real rudo moment of the match from Villano, as he refuses to break the hold despite being instructed to by the referee. Atlantis angrily shoves Villano into the ropes, and he fires back with slaps to the face before firmly establishing himself as a true rudo, tearing at the mask of Atlantis. Despite the best efforts of both Atlantis and the referee, Villano manages to expose much of his opponent's face, before doubling down with a closed fist shot for good measure. This causes the crowd to really boo Villano for the first time in the match, an impressive feat for the rudo to control this very hot crowd and get the desired reaction from them. A huge lariat sends Atlantis over the top rope and onto the floor. Villano decides to take a huge risk and connects with a tope suicida, and both he and Atlantis sell the pain of the head-to-head collision that just occurred. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Scorpio Jr. assist their respective allies, as the referee calls for a doctor to make his way ringside to check on the competitors. We get a close-up on Atlantis, and we see that the impact of the tope, Villano's head colliding with his own, has busted him open, and blood is now beginning to pour from his head, through his ripped mask, and onto his chest. There are some visuals in wrestling that always work for me, and probably the greatest of them, a wrestler heavily bleeding through a ripped mask. It just always looks insane to me, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of seeing it. The doctor checks on both Atlantis and Villano, as both men are now bleeding, though it's clear that Atlantis got the worst of that dive. Villano makes his way onto the apron and begins bombarding Atlantis with knees and punches to the head, before a headbutt stuns both men. Atlantis manages to get in some strikes of his own, and powers Villano up for a vertical suplex. Villano manages to reverse the hold into a small package for a close 2 count, before knocking Atlantis to the outside. It's clear who's in control of the match at this point. Villano is in the ring showboating for the crowd, while Atlantis is ringside, off balance and breathing heavy, his distinctive white and blue mask badly torn and beginning to be replaced by a crimson mask of Villano's creation. Atlantis makes his way back in with an impressive sunset flip for a 2 count, though the effort required to slingshot over the top rope leaves him exhausted, and he stumbles into the corner. Villano approaches, taunting Atlantis and landing a stiff kick to the chest. A huge slap knocks Atlantis to the canvas, allowing Villano to lock in a torturous submission hold, though Atlantis is able to survive it. Villano tries to earn a submission with the camel clutch, though he is unable to get a tight enough grip of Atlantis, perhaps due to the amount of blood on Atlantis' face, and he is able to escape the hold. Atlantis manages to return the favour, locking a bow and arrow in the centre of the ring, but he's unable to sustain the hold for long due to the blood loss, allowing Villano to land an elbow drop, though his trademark arrogant pin is kicked out at 2. With the stakes as high as they are, it's unsurprising that both luchadors are focusing on trying to end the match as quickly as possible. Rather than aiming to do damage to their opponents with power moves, each is constantly looking for submissions or quick pinfalls to try and outmaneuver their opponent and get the victory, leaving the crowd constantly on tenterhooks. Atlantis tries to block the abdominal stretch, but is overpowered by Villano, who turns it into a pinning attempt that gets another 2 count. Villano continues to just grind down Atlantis, this time with a Muta lock, though it's still not enough to pick up the victory. The Technico finally begins to build some momentum, and flies off the top rope with a crossbody, but Villano is able to roll through for 2. Atlantis is just about able to connect with a Hurricane Rana, but again, only for 2. He sends Villano to the floor with a dropkick and is looking for a tope, though Villano ducks below the apron to evade it. A dropkick from Atlantis forces him away from the apron, and Atlantis takes advantage by climbing to the top rope and connecting with a huge plancha, leaving both men laying on the outside. By far my biggest criticism about the presentation of this match is the camera cuts to the crowd. When timed well and used sparingly, they can be invaluable, portraying the spectacle of a match like this. And occasionally seeing the fans completely absorbed in the match can really add a lot, especially watching it a quarter of a century later. However, these long crowd shots, when poorly timed as they often are in this match, can mean we miss out on seeing key moments or changes in momentum, leaving the match feeling disjointed, as though there are ad breaks in the match and during each one, key developments are taking place. Back inside the ring, Villano manages to catch Atlantis' lariat and transitions beautifully into a flying octopus hold. Atlantis is able to counter into a modified stretch muffler pin attempt, before squatting down and stretching Villano even further. Villano's impressive core strength allows him to reverse the hold into an incredibly close 2 count, and he slams the mat in frustration. He sends Atlantis off the ropes, but he comes back and manages to lock in a reverse gory special. Villano manages to free his arms and fights against the submission, once again using his impressive core strength to position himself in the electric chair, which he reverses into a sunset flip for 2. An exhausted Atlantis is unable to avoid a huge lariat from Villano, which he follows up with a leg drop and senton. He briefly locks in the Cristo Negro, before Atlantis is able to reverse into a small package for the closest 2 count of the match yet. Villano charges, but he gets caught in La Atlantida and the crowd erupts. Villano is shockingly able to escape the hold, before knocking Atlantis to the mat with a shot to the back of the head. Both men are completely exhausted now, and Atlantis avoids a wild lariat and knocks Villano down with a dropkick, targeting his now weakened back. Villano staggers around the ring before charging Atlantis once again, and once more he gets caught in La Atlantida. Atlantis manages to drop to his knees to complete the hold, and the crowd absolutely explodes when Villano Tercero submits. The post-match is just as spectacular and emotional as the match itself. Villano is joined by his brothers, his father Ray Mendoza, and his son. He cuts an impassioned promo while his father begins removing his mask. Villano thanks the fans, many of whom are incredibly emotional, and praises Atlantis. His father and brother remove the mask, and he reveals his real name to the world, holding his son in his arms. To see 3 generations of a wrestling family in the ring after a match like that is a beautiful moment, the sort of moment that is unique to Lucha Libre. He hands the mask to Atlantis, who cuts an impassioned promo himself, his formerly white mask torn apart and completely red. This match is truly special. When Villano dives out the ring and his head collides with Atlantis, the match transforms, from classic Lucha Libre to a bloody and desperate struggle for supremacy. The crowd is completely invested in the match, and the tension is unlike anything else. The stakes could not be any higher. A lucha de apuesta between 2 stars of this caliber comes around once in a generation, and the crowd knows full well how significant this match is. The contest is an almost constant back and forth between the 2. Nearly every move in the match has the potential to be the last, with both men using many different pinning techniques and submission holds throughout, trying to end the match and claim their rival's mask. The fact that these moves are so commonplace only adds to the tension, as for so much of the contest the crowd is watching either a pin or submission in progress, knowing that at any second someone can be defeated, and every fan is on the edge of their seat as a result. The match is a constant escalation, with the holds being applied growing more powerful on a steady incline, with both men being caught in and then escaping the other's most dangerous submission in the closing minutes of the bout. The trajectory of the match, the stakes, and an utterly captivated crowd, it's a perfect recipe for a match that feels like a true fight for survival. Most of the Lucha Libre that I've seen is pretty black and white. Technicos are cheered and rudos are booed, and the crowd is generally united in their support of the heroes. In this match, it's not so. I've read a few different reviews and interpretations of the crowd behaviour in this one. Some have claimed that the crowd is firmly behind Atlantis. Others have said they were clearly supporting Villano over the Technico. And others have said that the crowd is actually evenly split. This level of ambiguity over the crowd reaction, something that is so often cut and dry in Lucha Libre and pro wrestling as a whole, is a clear indicator of just how unique this match is, and how deeply affecting it is for the fans in attendance. If you want my perspective, as a wrestling fan outside of the culture of Lucha Libre, I believe the crowd here is supporting Lucha Libre itself, the artistry and passion of it, every fan giving all the energy they can muster to the match, as if trying to will into existence an outcome in which both men emerge with their masks intact. Of all the styles and subgenres of wrestling out there, Lucha Libre has always been the one I've struggled to fully connect with and appreciate the most. It's the genre of wrestling I find to be the most unlike any other. So much about it is completely unique to that style. The symbolism and importance of the apuesta matches, and the comparative lack of reverence towards championship titles, including the most historic and long-standing ones. The hard lines of rudo and technico, and the acknowledgement of luchadors being one or the other within shows themselves. 2 out of 3 full stipulation being the rule rather than the exception. But the difference I find most difficult to acclimatise to as a fan has to be the crowds. Don't get me wrong, some of the loudest and hottest crowds I've ever heard were for CMLL shows, but I do often struggle to fully connect with them. They're often incredibly loud, but I don't find them to be as reactive. In this match, for instance, they react loudly for the wrestlers as they make their entrances, and the pop when Villano submits has to be seen and heard to be believed. But the rest of the time they seem fairly static. I would need to watch more Lucha Libre to try and understand if this criticism is a fair one. A crowd that's this loud for this long means that the promotion and the wrestlers have to be doing something right. But I can't help but feel that I would have enjoyed this match that much more if the crowd reaction had peaks and troughs as the action did, rather than a flat, but still high, bar. I'm always cautious of using the term psychology when talking about wrestling. A lot of the time it's used in an attempt to pass off a subjective viewpoint and an objective reality. The sort of arrogant sleight of hand that I really want to distance myself from in these videos. But for lack of a better term, I have to say that I do struggle to connect with the psychology of Lucha Libre more than any other style. It may well be because Lucha is the style that I've watched the least, or it may just be that my taste in wrestling just isn't very compatible with it. In my previous video, discussing the matches between the Super Generation Army and Sarutogan, I started to talk about my preferences when it comes to wrestling, and the idea that the matches that I enjoy most are a fine balance of immersion and spectacle. I think it's because I find Lucha Libre to be generally the least immersive style of wrestling I watch, but that's by and large the intention. This may be an uninformed oversimplification, but my understanding of Lucha Libre based on what I've seen is that it's less simulated combat. Another wrestling term I begrudgingly use for lack of a better one, and more about the theatrics, the pageantry, the athleticism, and the spectacle. When I watch even the greatest Lucha Libre, there will be awkward moments or stop-starts that disrupt the flow and can make the cooperative, performative nature of it obvious. I think being annoyed by that would be as ridiculous as saying there's not enough blood or weapons in World of Sport style matches, or that there's not enough dives in a battle arts match. That's just not what the style was about. I'm not sure Lucha Libre will ever be for me, in the way that King's Road matches for instance are, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the style for what it is, and this match is certainly one of the greatest examples of that spectacle. The way Lucha Libre generally handles face-heel alignments of wrestlers, commentators, managers and referees can feel like a simplification of wrestling, the removal of a level of subtlety and ambiguity, especially compared to wrestling in other countries and cultures. I think that's accurate in many ways, but I'm not convinced it's necessarily a bad thing. In terms of understanding the struggle and story of professional wrestling, Lucha Libre may well be the most accessible subgenre that exists. There are good guys and bad guys, and very little grey area in between. Technicos abide by the rules. They are skilled, honourable competitors. Rudos break the rules. They fight dirty, and tend to wrestle a more brawling style. The presentation of mainstream Lucha Libre, the masks and names chosen to conceal the identity of the competitors, combined with the often fast-paced and athletic style of the action, makes Lucha Libre into a true spectacle. One that I would argue often has more in common with superhero cartoons and pantomime shows than it does with many other styles of wrestling. And yet, almost paradoxically, the theatrical and fantastical world of Lucha Libre may be the purest form of wrestling that exists. The moral contrasts, the masked heroes and villains, and the almost mythological grandeur of the presentation ensure that even the most casual viewers understand what's at stake. Rather than a limitation, this lack of ambiguity is possibly its greatest strength, allowing Lucha Libre to function as pure, distilled wrestling storytelling. If that's what Lucha Libre means, then Atlantis vs Villano III may be the greatest example of it. In this match, it's simplified even further than black and white. It's not about rudos and technicals, heels and babyfaces. It's as simple as a test of strength, iron sharpening iron. Two wrestlers putting their pride, their ego, their identities themselves on the line against one another, to see who is the better man, with the crowd supporting not one man, but all of Lucha Libre. If a single match could encapsulate a style at its purest, then Atlantis vs Villano III may well be Lucha Libre itself. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then be sure to subscribe for more videos like it. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about one of the most unbelievable one-night performances in modern wrestling history, as Speedball Mike Bailey competes 4 times in one night in the most prestigious tournament on the independent scene, PWG's Battle of Los Angeles. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Cheers.